Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We'll take a minute to let everyone come in, and then we'll get started. Hello, everyone. We'll get started in just a minute when we get some more people in the door here. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So, hello and welcome everyone to Office Hours, the session where you can get your questions answered. I'm Chris Dawson, the publisher of Maven's Notebook, and I'll be your host today. I'm joined today with a group from the statewide support entity, a rather odd name, and they'll tell you all about it, for the Multibenefit Land Repurposing Program. And our topic today is land repurposing. So for those of you that are unaware, I publish the website Maven's Notebook, California's Water News Central. So if by chance you are unfamiliar with it, visit mavensnotebook.com and check it out. I'm flying solo today, so I'll be working from the Q&A. So please enter your questions in the Q&A, as I won't be able to monitor the chat. In the Q&A, you will also have the option to upvote questions that you're interested in hearing answered, and I'll work in the order of the most upvoted questions first. The goal is to get as many of your questions answered as I can in the next hour. I will be sending a follow-up email to everyone who registered that will include a link to the recording of this session and additional resources. So let's get started. Implementing the sustainable groundwater management in the San Joaquin Valley will mean taking anywhere from 500,000 to 900,000 acres or more out of production. That's a lot of land that will be fallowed, and how we go about doing that is important. So in 2022, the state launched the Multi-Benefit Land Repurposing Program with the objective of finding shared solutions for landscapes facing an uncertain groundwater future. Since then, the program has seen significant progress toward program and block grantee goals. So here today to talk about the program is Ann Hayden, Sonia Sanchez, and Jose Rodriguez with the statewide support entity. So why don't you take a moment to introduce yourselves, and I'm going to put some resources in the chat while you do so.
Hi, everyone. I'll go first. Ann Hayden. I'm Vice President of Environmental Defense Fund's Climate Resilient Water Systems Program. And our goal in this program is to rebalance our water systems so that we can have a resilient future for agriculture, for communities, and for ecosystems. And I'm going to hand it over to Jose, my colleague, to introduce himself.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Jose Rodriguez. I'm a senior analyst at the Climate Water Resilient Systems team at EDF. I'm also part of the steward support entity, as has been mentioned many times now. And I provide research and support to coordinating the steward support entity task on monitoring, but also we host monthly meetings, and we develop this co-learning network among block grantees. We develop guidance that we'll be mentioning probably later. Yeah, so welcome you all, and thank you, Maven, for hosting us.
No problem. Glad to have you all here. Okay.
Sonia?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Sonia Sanchez. I'm a manager with Self-Help Enterprises in the Community Engagement and Planning Department. I'm also part of the statewide support entity, and our role and focus is community outreach and engagement, as it's a really core piece of this program.
Excellent. I'm just getting the last of these resources pasted into the chat. Okay, one last. Okay, lots of resources in the chat, so I won't be looking at that anymore. So please enter your questions into the Q&A. Okay, but meanwhile, we'll get started. Okay, so briefly, Ann, why don't you tell us about the MLRP program? Like, what is it and what is it not? Like, for those, it's not paying farmers to convert to solar. It's something else, I believe. So why don't you explain?
Yeah, I'll get into that. And I might just first, Chris, talk a little bit about kind of the problem that this program is trying to solve, and then I'll go into the details of what the program is. So to build off of the context setting that you provided, the Public Policy Institute of California has estimated that over the next 2 decades, we could see upwards of 900,000 acres go out of production in the San Joaquin Valley alone. And so that's nearly a fifth of current acreage, and that's about the size of Yosemite National Park. So, if this land transition happens without the right intervention, we could see the valley characterized by this whole patchwork of fallowed fields. We could have, these fields kicking up dust, which could, significantly impact air quality in an area where we have some of the worst air quality in the country. And these fields could also become home to weeds and pests, which could also impact the remaining agricultural fields. So what we're trying to do here is do something differently, get out ahead of these impacts, plan for how land could be repurposed to other uses that require less water and can provide public benefits. So a number of years ago, EDF and a whole range of partners started thinking through how a program like this could work as kind of a companion to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, so that we can have a strategic approach to how this land transition occurs. So, as SGMA is being implemented and pumping is being reduced, there's going to be less water that can be used to irrigate land. So the MLRP is really intended to help provide support and guidance to farmers, water managers, and communities as they plan for these changes to the landscape and face a future with less water. And so the idea behind the MLRP is to help ease this transition for farmers to use less water and do something productive on their land that requires, again, less water and can create public benefits. So the MLRP, Multi-Benefit Land Repurposing Program, is administered by the Department of Conservation, and it provides block grants through a competitive process to local entities. In most cases, these are groundwater sustainability agencies to support the planning of land repurposing in some defined area, say a sub-basin, as well as the implementation of land repurposing projects. And so the Groundwater Sustainability Agency or local agency is tasked with designing an inclusive stakeholder process that allows for really robust community input. And then these stakeholders, community members, help develop a land repurposing plan and then they will implement projects. So what's nice about the MLRP is it's not overly prescriptive in terms of what projects are eligible, other than they have to show a clear reduction in groundwater pumping, and they need to demonstrate at least one other benefit to communities and ecosystems. So the types of projects that are eligible currently are things like multi-benefit groundwater recharge basins, where some land can be repurposed to a recharge basin that's designed to not only opportunistically store, flood flows when they're available, but also provide habitat for migratory birds, or provide flood control for downstream communities, for example. There are also projects like low impact solar, community recreational spaces, low water use crops, upland habitat that can be established with very little water. And it's just really important to underscore the flexibility that this program provides in terms of, farmers can participate in a project in perpetuity, through, say, conservation easement on lands that they've repurposed to habitat. Or they can also do things on a shorter time frame of at least 10 years so that they have the opportunity to kind of try out how, different projects could work. With the option after the 10 years are up, they can then opt out and decide to do something else with their land. And so this is really about creating a menu of options for farmers to be able to look to. And the intent is very much to try to be as strategic on a regional basis as possible. So to get away from kind of this one by one fallowed field to farmers on a voluntary basis working together to consolidate lands that can be repurposed to another use. So for example, one potential option could be, having lands lined up in close proximity to an existing habitat area, thereby creating more of a habitat corridor, which is, these types of ecosystems are very much in need for listed species in the valley. And so the program is very much intended to help farmers keep farming, albeit on a smaller footprint, and allow them to have options about how to take some of those lands that they can no longer irrigate and repurpose them to new uses. And I like to think of it as the valley eventually becoming kind of this mosaic of new uses, agricultural lands adjacent to community recreational spaces or habitat or recharge basins, all of which can benefit the health and well-being of valley residents. So I'll leave it there for now. I will say what it is not. It is not a program that's about outright buying out farmland. This is about, again, providing funds to help plan for land repurposing and also to provide farmers with funds to still stay in ownership of those lands, but change the way they're managing the lands, again, for this whole array of different uses that require less water. So that's a really important distinction I want to make.
Okay, great. I got a note in the Q&A that my resources didn't show up in the chat. So hopefully they are there now. The chat doesn't look real active. So can a few people just say hi so I know it's all working for you so I can go back to the Q&A?
There you go.
Okay, I see. And so there's hopefully do you see the resources now? No, not yet. Okay, well, let me take a minute to just put these in one by one because it seems to have a limit. And then we can resume. Okay, is it there? Okay. And I am going to include a link to the PPIC report on land repurposing in the San Joaquin Valley because they did talk about it, and how you go about doing it and doing it in a cohesive manner is really, from their study showed that it's really going to make a big difference to how it plays out on the ground, and you can really lessen the impacts by being smart about it. And I think that's what this program is trying to do.
Hey, Chris, I think you're sharing the resources to host panelists only. Maybe you need to check everyone.
So I'm seeing them. Yeah.
Oh, well, great. I'm glad. Oh, I am so sorry.
Over.
Okay, well, now I know that means I can probably put them all in at once. Sorry, bonehead. Okay. No, I have to do it less. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, one last time, but now this will go to everyone. There we go. Okay.
Hey.
Man, Zoom, I learned something new every time, I swear. Every time. Okay. We'll get
Chris, would it be helpful to talk a little bit about kind of maybe I'm getting ahead of your questions, but like the state of the program?
Oh yeah, let's talk about it, because right now, my understanding there isn't funding for another round, but we're hoping that's going to change. So
we are hoping. So there's been, and definitely Sonia and Jose chime in and correct anything I'm saying, but I will say that the program has been funded with $90 million to date. And there have been 2 rounds of block grants that have gone out, to a total of 8 block grant recipients. 6 of the 8 are in the San Joaquin Valley. The other 2 are kind of in the coastal areas where groundwater overdraft is also an issue. But and I will defer to Sonia and Jose to talk about kind of what those block grant recipients are doing. But I will say that amount of funding is a great start, but it really is a drop in the bucket in terms of what's going to be needed to address this issue at scale, which is very likely to be in the billions. And so I'll go into more detail about kind of our ideas for continuing to find funding for the program in a bit, but maybe I'll turn to Sonia and Jose on kind of what's going on to date with those block grant recipients.
Sure. So we have, like Ann mentioned, we have 4 block grantees that were in round 1 and 4 in round 2. Believe me, Chris, one of the resources that you dropped was a list to the project summaries. But you can see that there is a really wide range of projects that are proposed by the grantees. There's some that include buffer zones that could help communities with, air quality, for example. There are some projects where they're proposing recharge, but also perhaps a bike path for neighboring communities. And there was also some other examples that were shared in the project proposals that include having some tribal components or economic development components to projects. So it's such a really great program because it touches on so many different topics that ultimately, when you look at it holistically, really do help with groundwater sustainability and climate resiliency. In California, we're seeing this whiplash of weather, of extreme droughts to extreme flooding now, and these are all affecting our frontline communities. And so, with the program really focusing both through the legislation and the guidelines requiring prioritizing disadvantaged community benefits. These block grantees really did show that in their applications and were one of the reasons why they got funded. This program was really oversubscribed, and I think that's important to note that there's a lot of interest in this program from throughout the state. And the Department of Conservation did a really great job in reviewing and evaluating the applications that were received. And as Ann mentioned, 6 out of the 8 are in the San Joaquin Valley because the San Joaquin Valley is the epicenter of where these impacts are taking place. So I think that's really important to know. And we'll touch more on this, I think, a little bit later. But the other really important piece here, I think, is the collaboration in these project applications. Although the applications are, GSAs or groundwater sustainability agencies or other agencies locally, they really did have to demonstrate project collaboration. So just wanted to touch on those aspects in terms of not only like project examples that grantees proposed, but how this project is being looked at and how the Department of Conservation evaluated the applications, because I think that is really unique in this program and hopefully can be replicated in the future with other programs. Jose, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else.
Well, I don't know. I saw that you got on mute, Chris. So I will maybe let you follow up with what Sonia was saying, maybe.
No, if you have something to add, please do. Oh.
Yeah, well, maybe just in addition to what Sonia just mentioned, I think as we've seen the round 1, moving forward to developing scoring criteria and project prioritization process, we see how some of the mechanisms that they are developing to like incentivize farmers to participate in the program, but also have a process where also communities can lead projects and apply them within each block grantee. Like the diversity of projects that are implemented really highlight what makes each region unique and how this regional planning can really enhance and like the resiliency of the region to floods and droughts, but also the of local communities protecting domestic wells and create habitat connectivity or enhance habitat for endangered wildlife, right? So we have seen really a huge opportunity within the program and partners and collaborators in each program to create these like first projects that are implemented through the program and that can be later replicated across the region, but also in the San Joaquin Valley, and also how they are achieving like the enrollment motivate the enrollment of farmers in this program or other programs that have existed in the state to achieve groundwater savings, but also creating mechanisms that farmers feel that are fair for them and have flexibility in their use of land. So I think Sonia mentioned community participation, but also farmer participation is key, and farmer outreach from block grantees is key to make this program successful.
Yeah, and we have now some new players in the water world, the Department of Conservation, that we may not be, used to hearing about. And also, they've given you this sort of odd name, statewide support entity. It sounds like, there should be the statewide support entity is, fill in the blank, the name, and I think I actually, after I covered this presentation, I sent an email to the guy going, so who is the statewide support entity? And it took me a minute to figure out, oh, that's the name.
I just on that, I'll just say for shorthand, and Sonia and Jose correct me, but I call it the hub of best available information for the block grant recipients on land repurposing, on community outreach, on how to find additional funding to leverage the state funds to do more. And so Sonia and Jose and this big team of partners have been in regular, at least monthly, if not more frequent contact with the block grant recipients, sharing information. And really it's this two-way, it's a dialogue where there's a lot of learning and exchange of ideas happening. And again, as I mentioned before, there's so much room in this program for new ideas to be presented and folded in. I mean, we wanted to make sure we had the foundation of really robust and inclusive stakeholder engagement, clear delivery of benefits to communities and ecosystems, a strategic regional approach, clear demonstrated savings, groundwater savings. Then there's so much room within that to make it work depending on what communities want to see ultimately. So they've been doing an awesome job making that work with the locals.
So I do have one question here. If you have questions, folks, let's enter them into the Q&A. And this is a quick one. Did a basin have to be severely overdrafted to participate?
Yes, in the first 2 rounds of funding, that was one of the criteria. So yes, they do need to be overdrafted, severely overdrafted.
Okay, so I could go 2 ways here, but actually let's go back, and you were talking about the resources that you had available. So not every basin is going to be able to enter the program, because I don't think, there'll be funding in the future, but it won't be for 100%. So what sort of resources do you have available for folks who might want to be implementing something like this in their basin?
Well, certainly the resources, educational and outreach materials that the statewide support entity are producing will be valuable across many basins in the state. But in terms of financial resources, we are very eagerly, looking at, so obviously this last budget cycle, this is a tough year for the state. So there was not funding for multi-benefit land repurposing this time around. Our funding was deferred to a climate bond, which is now being it's under consideration. We ended last year with two versions of a bond presented, an assembly version and a Senate version, both around 15 billion. One of the versions had 300 million in there for MLRP, one had 100 million. We have not yet seen priorities from the governor on the bond. We're eagerly awaiting more information on that front. We have worked with, EDF has worked with 160 other community-based organizations, environmental organizations to put together priorities for a climate bond. And so we are, at the ready for when the governor comes out with his proposal, where we can kind of help influence that. So we're hopeful a bond, which we're understanding will likely be lower than 10 billion, will go to the ballot in November. But we also know that there are federal sources of funding that exist, whether it's through existing farm bill programs, in the USDA, for kind of elements of what we're trying to do here, but we're trying to take it a step further. And so we've worked with Senator Padilla's office they introduced legislation last year called the Voluntary Agricultural Land Repurposing Act, which basically takes the framework for the California program and sets aside, so it has 250 million, again, not quite enough, but a good start, that California would be eligible for that funding, but also this would help kind of start getting in momentum. Other pilot land repurposing programs in other Western states, because the issues we're facing here in California are across the West. This is actually globally, wherever we're facing climate change and water scarcity, and we have a significant amount of water being used by agriculture, we're going to be seeing this issue of the agricultural footprint very much likely having to decrease. So the more we have models for how to do this effectively, to create this, again, this mosaic of a whole range of benefits that agriculture can look to communities can look to, ecosystems can look to, the better off we're going to be. So not much is happening in DC right now, but there's a really great starting point for kind of replicating what we've done in California through federal legislation. And we are also putting together, through the statewide support entity, a whole, again, catalog of different state and federal programs that block grant recipients can pull on to, again, leverage the funding that they've gotten from Department of Conservation.
Okay, great. Well, we have some questions in the Q&A, so let's get to them.
Yes,
First
maybe
off,
before we move on, if I could touch on one piece,
Oh,
because I think
please
this
do.
is really helpful. Part of the question was about resources available, and in our annual report, starting on page 33, we do offer a really comprehensive list of tools and resources that we either developed or offered to the block grantees. This includes, for example, a community and grower engagement survey that we developed as part of the statewide support entity for block grantees to get ideas of what their stakeholders are interested in and would like to see as part of these projects. So I would encourage folks that are interested in resources and tools to look to our annual report on page 33. There is about, 2 to 3 pages of resources that we have available.
Okay, great. Thank you. And please, anyone, do jump in. And it looks like I have a broken link that I need to fix. So I'm just not having a good head day, am I? Okay, first question I have up here. Does the local GSA have a consultation or approval role?
I'm assuming this means in terms of what actually moves forward in their particular
yeah, do they have to do they have to approve a plan if I'm guessing, do they have to approve a plan if they're not the
with
grantee?
the stakeholders that they've brought in, they will work together to get an agreed upon plan that then has to be submitted to Department of Conservation to get their sign off. But Sonia, do you want to elaborate on that?
Sure. Yeah, that's right. And I can share the example of the Korea MLRP group because they're the ones that are further along. You know, each of these grantee groups are at different stages. Some already had some existing work around land repurposing, but for the Korea MLRP group, that's exactly what happened, as Ann described, is they included their stakeholder advisory committee, which consists of growers, local community residents. We have a tribal member as part of the stakeholder group, and together they reviewed projects that were put forward in that subbasin. They discussed those projects. Some had questions about the projects themselves that they wanted to have answers to before they were put forward to the Department of Conservation for funding. And we had the Groundwater Sustainability Agency representatives at that meeting as well. So it was a very collaborative dialogue that took place. And based on those recommendations, both from the stakeholder committee and the projects that the Groundwater Sustainability Agency received, they put forward projects for funding to the Department of Conservation. So, you know, we did see that really great process take place there already. And that is, you know, one of the best practices that we have shared is to have that dialogue, that communication, present the projects to a stakeholder advisory committee for feedback, and then based on that feedback, move forward and propose projects to the Department of Conservation, which is a really great piece of this program. And I think a really great feature and component is that the grantees don't just receive the funding up front for projects. Rather, there is a process in place to submit applications to the Department of Conservation for their review. And this includes a project implementation approval package that the grantees need to put together and submit to the state, and their projects really do need to meet the objectives of the program to be considered for funding. And one of these key components of this is inclusion of best practices for disadvantaged communities and engaging them. So the grantees do need to show that engagement of disadvantaged communities did take place. So you know, I think that's a really great feature, again, because you don't just receive the money up front. You really have to show that the objectives and that community engagement took place.
Yes, I'm sure it's highly competitive too.
I would like to add just something quickly, that one of the goals is that the land repurposing plans are incorporated to the planning of the GSAs or to the GSPs. And if people go to actually the last update of many of the GSPs that were submitted to DWR earlier this month or later last month, I mean, we can see an example on how GSAs are including MLRP as part of their portfolio of strategies to achieve demand reduction, but also, of course, including the goals of the program, as we've mentioned, in like benefits for communities and ecosystems. So I will encourage people to see, I mean, yeah, like these updates, for example, Madera, Merced, Tule, I think all of them have already included this in their updates.
Okay, great. Next question. USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service has a lot of complementary technical and financial assistance that could be leveraged into MLRP projects. Have you suggested that grantees work with the NRCS in their local areas?
Jose, do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, let me read the.
It's about NRCS technical support. And I know we identify the funding opportunities. I am assuming we're also cataloging the technical support that's available and making those connections on the ground.
Yeah, connections to funding sources through NRCS, yeah, is something that we have highlighted and pointed grantees to those resources. About the technical assistance, I think it depends. each block grantee has a very diverse group of partners and collaborators. Actually, in that link where we are sharing their project summaries, partners and collaborators are also listed. So you can see there, for example, that some of the block grantees are working with RCDs or other TA providers that I think are key in have a robust implementation of praise, but something that like a general connection between NRCS and the program, I think doesn't exist. I think this depends on each program team.
Yeah, and I can add that in June of last year, we did have an agency funding resource fair for our monthly block grantee meeting. So every month we have a meeting with the block grantees on a different topic. In June, it was a resource funding fair, and we did have Brandon Bates from NRCS present about funding opportunities that they have available that could complement the MLRP program. We also had folks from the Department of Conservation about other funding programs that they have, like SALC. We had folks from the Grizzly Corps, from U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So we did have, different types of speakers and funding available through these different departments and agencies that could complement MLRP funding.
Okay, great. Okay, and Blaine, I think you put yes, Blaine, really, you put a question in the chat. Could you please move that to the Q&A, because I cannot do that. Okay. Next question. Would the details of the GSA proposals beyond the summaries you showed be available? It would be great to have an idea of what kind of proposals are successful and what were not.
I believe those are available on the DOC website. They had been previously, but Sonia, Jose, can you confirm that?
I don't think I'm understanding the question. Is it the project summaries, or is it the projects that were put forward? And
the proposals, I believe. So that would be what they put forward to be considered, because he says it would give them an idea of what proposals were successful and what were not. So
I think the full proposals are available. That's my recollection.
I can check on their website now, but that's right. They either were or are on the website.
Okay, if you find it, you can stick it in the chat. If not, send it to me by email and I'll include it in the webinar follow-ups. Okay. And folks, you can vote up the questions that you're most interested in hearing. Okay. And we have one that just rose to the top. Have any funded projects incorporated a floodwater recharge, floodmar component? Are they including floodmar?
Jose?
Yeah, I think it's one of the priorities that some of the regions are taking into. As we talk multi-benefit projects, flood risk reduction with groundwater recharge is up in the list. I think we haven't mentioned that we have also there are also 2 block grantees in the Central Coast, Pájaro and Salinas, and as many of the attendees know, those regions were severely impacted by floods in the past years. So they actually have projects focusing on flood risk mitigation there with recharge component, and also in the south part of the San Joaquin Valley in the Tulare County area. But so definitely yes. There are not projects yet implemented, but definitely it's people are discussing them and proposing them.
And so I think, and on that, one role the statewide support entity will play is, as those projects are being presented, kind of working with the block grant recipients or individual farmers to talk about ways in which multiple benefits can be baked into that particular recharge project. You know, perhaps they already are considering wildlife benefits, but maybe there are ways to design it that can also, you know, serve as more flood control. So that's one example of how the statewide support entity will not be, will kind of be there as kind of providing advice and guidance. And there's no silver bullet here. There's so many different ways these things can take shape, but we are trying to maximize the benefits across sectors.
Okay, do you have any estimate as to how much these programs, how much water they've saved so far? I know, tough question.
No, because in this first year, projects weren't implemented quite yet. There was a lot of ramp up and things like that. So we're just starting to see those proposals and projects being submitted to the Department of Conservation for funding. So in our next annual report, we should be able to start reporting on that.
Yeah, so there's a metric for that they're tracking? Oh, okay,
Yes.
great, good. We all like performance measures, right?
And now that you mention that, one of the key roles that we're having as a statewide support is developing the core metrics that the program will be monitoring for all the block grantees, and one of them is water savings, among other things like community outreach, clear other benefits to disadvantaged communities, among other things. But yeah, just to highlight that that's one of those metrics, and that monitoring is something that we're supporting with.
Okay, next question. I'm curious about the examples of land repurposing programs that you are aware of across the West. Are there examples that you think hold particularly relevant lessons for basins in California? And can you point out any resources that might help us understand where this work is already going on across the West? Is it what's going on in other states, or are we the trailblazer?
I'll look to Jose also on this, but there aren't a ton of examples. I know that we are planning to highlight the Walker Basin in Nevada. We're actually going to do some filming up there soon so that we can kind of capture the story there, which is really, again, about rebalancing the water system in that watershed and balancing water use among farmers and ecosystems and tribes. And they've had some success that's worth pointing to, and especially around stakeholder engagement and delivery of real beneficial outcomes for ecosystems. I do know we had in our white paper, we produced a white paper, which maybe we can include here in the chat, specific to California, that preceded the legislation. And in there, I believe we highlight a number of case studies that there are a number of examples of projects, I think, in California, but we might have some examples outside of California to include as well. Jose, do you know offhand, are there other examples you want to highlight here?
I was putting the report in the chat, but thank you, Chris, for well, I mean, I think programs like MRP, besides the Walker Basin example, haven't existed. I think, it's just this program just shows an example on how to think about demand reduction programs or following programs in another way. And these kind of programs are being implemented in other states, like in the Colorado River basin as well. But I think there are a lot of lessons that those federal and state programs can learn from MRP, because I think there's a lot of sensitivity, and maybe just have a following program doesn't meet the goals that growers and communities have. So I think it's one of the opportunities, but I think just projects are examples in California and in the San Joaquin Valley of how former cropland has been restored, like the Carrizo Plain or the Dos Rios State Park now. So I mean, there are examples of projects, but yeah, maybe not so much on programs and a systematic
A
way
regional
to
approach. I
handle.
think what makes it so unique is the regional approach. I mean,
Mhm.
Jose is exactly right. There are plenty of examples of kind of one-off projects of how to take previously irrigated ag land and repurpose it to habitat, but not in a, again, regional approach where we're kind of thinking ahead and planning to do this much more strategically and at a landscape level.
Okay, next question. What role does EDF play in this program? Who is the we that you often refer to?
Oh,
The
well,
proverbial we.
yeah. Well, I will speak to EDF's role. I mean, we kind of just proceed, backing up from the program itself. And it's not EDF and not just EDF, but there are other NGOs and stakeholders who are thinking about this as Sigma was starting to be implemented of, oh, this is going to have some major impacts across the landscape. And I should be clear, it's Sigma plus, there's other climate change, water scarcity components. So this is not all fall on Sigma, which Sigma also is going to help us get to ultimately a reliable supply. So I just want to caveat that. But we started to see the writing on the wall, as I'm sure farmers saw when the legislation passed, of this was going to mean less water to go around. And so our whole kind of approach to this has been what sort of strategies exist to help the agricultural community and the community writ large kind of ease that transition, minimize economic impacts to the extent possible, and actually prevent more bad things from happening, and maybe deliver some positive things. So that's been our lens on a lot of the work that we do, and definitely specific to land repurposing. So our role has been kind of to get as much stakeholder input, diverse input, factored in as this program got developed and passed in legislation and finally established. And now our role is working closely with self-help enterprises in playing the statewide support entity role, which is kind of like the implementation arm, planning and implementation arm of DOC specifically to this program. So we're there as a resource for block grant recipients, existing recipients of funding, but also planting the seeds, sharing stories more broadly across the state about this program, about this looming threat, and to help folks be informed and well-positioned to access funding when it does become available. So because I'm very, very hopeful that it will. I think there's broad recognition from the state and the feds. This is a huge issue that we have to invest in, and we've got a great program here that we're already starting to prove out how it can more effectively address this issue than any other way we've tried to attempt doing this previously.
And yeah, and I think the we in general terms is that statewide support entity, which is such a odd sounding name, but that's what it is. Which
acronyms
is
for this whole thing they're not great.
And that's EDF and Self-Help Enterprises, which, Self-Help Enterprises is pretty impressive nonprofit doing a lot of good work down there in the San Joaquin Valley. So I think that's a good team you have there at the statewide support entity. Okay. To my understanding, you guys will be taking care of the wildlife too. Community, water, food, and health are so important for me too. But for today, I would like to know about wildlife.
That is certainly part of kind of the future we want to move towards. I will be clear, this is not a program that's all aimed at restoring previously irrigated agriculture to habitat. This is about that mosaic of a whole wider range of different uses that can benefit communities, agriculture, and ecosystems, but certainly the opportunity to expand these really islands of protected areas, these islands of habitat we currently have available in the valley. Those opportunities are vast. If farmers can see a viable way for them to participate in programs that will provide them incentive payments, really make it worth their while to participate. So we're very much involved in trying to make sure the barriers to entry in doing habitat restoration are as low as possible for farmers to engage. So yeah, Jose, do you want to talk about some of the species specifically that we're focused on? I mean, there's a handful of listed species in particular on kind of upland habitat species that we're trying to make sure are folded into the habitat types that we are advancing through MLRP, and then also wetland-based species, but kit fox, San Joaquin Valley kit fox, kangaroo rat, but I'll let Jose elaborate.
Well, I will just point attendees to look at the guidelines because I think the guidelines, like just by looking at the guidelines, you can see how the program is not prescribing, but having this flexible framework that like is listed there that like federal protected species should be targeted and yeah, like great connectivity for wildlife as well. So I'll just add that. But I mean, certainly the species that Ann mentioned are the priority, at least in the San Joaquin Valley.
Yeah, and it's all about, with habitat restoration, it's about connectivity, and these little postage stamps all over the place are not particularly useful. So better than nothing, I guess, but it's that connectivity which is good. Okay.
And maybe I can share also on that point of habitat is that as a statewide support entity, we have what are known as implementation partners. And these are organizations that we bring on and have a subcontract with to help provide guidance and resources, not only to us as an entity, but also to the block grant recipients. And they provide, technical assistance and can do so, one-on-one, or we've had our implementation partners present at our monthly grantee meetings on different topics. One of them is the Nature Conservancy, because we recognize that habitats and this topic is very important. We brought them on as an implementation partner, and last year they did present on habitat to our block grantees, different wetland habitats, coastal habitats, things like that. So they really do bring that expertise and help not only the statewide support entity, but our block grantees with this topic.
And I know the Nature Conservancy has like the bird returns program and all sorts of different things.
Yeah.
So that's great to have them involved. Okay, how does a farmer get paid for taking his irrigated land out of production and over to the GSA for the MLRP?
So just to be clear, as SGMA is being implemented in a particular sub-basin, in most cases there will be a cap and some sort of allocation scheme developed where farmers will be put on kind of a ramp down schedule. So they will be decreasing their pumping over time. That decrease will, that will leave the farmer with a certain allocation that they're able to use on their land. And they will have to make decisions about which crops they want to grow and how much acreage that is going to require. What this program pays, it doesn't pay a farmer to take land out of production per se.
Right.
That will be happening as a result of implementing SGMA. What this program pays for is the public benefits, the creation of public benefits on those lands that they can no longer irrigate through the creation of, again, this whole range of different projects, groundwater recharge, habitat, solar, et cetera. So it's paying for the public benefit that's created. Hopefully that answered the question.
Okay, and last question, we have a time for a question or, oh, there is, I say, add your questions to the Q&A, but you did. Okay, could the speakers elaborate further regarding the statewide support entity's role in supporting block grantees with technical support? Were there any challenges or successes that could be shared with leveraging partners to support the block grantees' needs during round 1 of the MLRP program?
Sure, I can start. So as the statewide support entity, we have kind of these 5 main pillars of tasks that we have, as part of our role. One of them is community engagement and support, so helping engage disadvantaged communities, tribes, and socially disadvantaged farmers. We do that through providing tools and resources and best practices to the block grantees, one of which I mentioned earlier, which was a grower and community survey for the grantees to get to know what types of projects and challenges communities have, and maybe projects that can help with those challenges. We also provide overall block grantee support. So a few of them have been mentioned thus far. Every month we have a monthly block grantee meeting to provide resources and educational tools to the block grantees. We've had them on a range of topics, from community outreach and engagement to, like I mentioned, habitat with the Nature Conservancy. We've done low water use crop alternatives, and maybe one more I'll mention that we have coming up will be on solar and agrivoltaics, for example. So they really do cover a wide range of topics, all that relate to either implementing their projects or different stages of running their programs. We also provide peer facilitation support, so support for the block grantees to get together, share best practices. We do this throughout our monthly meetings, but also at our annual in-person meetings that we have with the block grantees. So we facilitate learning agendas and opportunities for the block grantees to share best practices amongst each other. We also, like Jose mentioned earlier, we are tasked with the monitoring and reporting of this program, so developing the metrics for this program. So all the block grantees will report based on the metrics that are being developed, so that we can evaluate the success of the projects and this program. Lastly, our final task is around communication, so coordinating external communications about the program, helping to build awareness for the program as well. We did that especially between the round 1 and round 2 funding, when the second round of funding was made available. So those are kind of our overall tasks that we have as the statewide support entity. And I have found this to be a really great opportunity and experience to be a part of. I definitely see how having EDF as more of like a statewide organization, science, having that expertise, and then having self-help enterprises who does a lot of this like local on the ground outreach work and working with communities, how this partnership has been really so far successful. Our annual report shows some of those highlights, but one of the learnings from round 1 to round 2 as part of the statewide support entity that we found to be really great is that there really is excitement for sharing tools and challenges, best practices, really being transparent about this program within the block grantees. There's not like this sense of like, oh, this is my project, I don't really want people to know what we're doing, like we don't want to share resources. It's completely the opposite, and I think that's really great. I think, again, the theme of collaboration amongst this program is really at the forefront, and that is evident with what we're seeing at our annual meetings with the block grantees. This last year in September, we welcomed the second round of grantees, and that was a really great thing that we experienced, was just that exchange of information and learnings from one another as part of this program.
Anybody else wanted to add?
I think a great point to end on.
Okay, and I think this is the last question is very quick. Have the funds under last year's MLRP grant applications for projects sponsored by and implemented on tribal lands been exhausted?
Uh,
Do you have a carve out for tribes?
Do.
Okay, good.
You want to talk
Yeah.
about that, Jose?
Yeah, the program has a separate budget for tribes. This hasn't been exhausted, but and there's one grantee in the Russian River region. I will encourage. Well, if Toby, I don't know if I pronounced your name right, but if you are interested, please email us. We can provide you more information on that. And anyone interested.
Okay,
I'm
great.
also dropping the information in the chat for where folks can get more info on that.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so we're at 1 o'clock. So thank you both, or thank you all. I just thank you all for coming. It's been a great session. I think we exchanged a lot of great information. I will be sending a follow-up email with a link to the recording and the resources that we posted in the chat, and also the contact information for our panelists here. So with that, I wish you a happy rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.